Mr. Yee, I think we can probably start.
Okay, let's go then. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Combating Asian Hate Crimes webinar hosted by the Queens County District Attorney's Office. My name is Myung-jae Matthew Yee. I am the Section Chief of the Queens DA's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and I'll be your moderator for today. Now, before we begin, we have some housekeeping matters to go over. First, the chat function of Zoom has been disabled for security purposes. So anybody who has questions, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen to ask any questions, and we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the program. Also, if you have any questions regarding any recent incidents that occurred in Queens County, please note that the panelists and I cannot speak about any pending cases in Queens County. So I apologize in advance if we cannot answer specific questions about any pending cases. Also, this webinar is being translated into Mandarin, Korean, and Bengali. In order to use the interpretation services, there is a globe icon towards the bottom of your Zoom screen called Interpretation. And when you click on that, there will be a choice of the language that you would like to have this translated in. So please click on that. And we also apologize that our Cantonese interpreter had an emergency situation and could not make it today. However, on behalf of the Queens District Attorney, we would like to thank Rokeya Akhtar for the Bengali translations, Sang-Hoon Lee for Korean translations, and Elizabeth Bian for Mandarin. And at this time, I have the pleasure of introducing the person who is responsible for making this webinar possible today. And I would like to introduce you to all to Melinda Katz, the Queens County District Attorney. And she's somebody who cares deeply about this county. She lives here and raises her children here, and spent much of her career in public service working to improve and protect the lives of Queens County residents. She's the first woman elected to serve as the Queens DA, and she's actually established the first all-woman leadership with Chief Executive ADA Jennifer Nyberg at the helm, along with Chief of Staff Camille Chinky Fat. Now, since taking office at an unprecedented time, the DA has led her office through a nationwide pandemic to ensure the safety of more than 2 million people who work and live in Queens County. Among her first-year accomplishments are the creation of a dedicated hate crimes bureau, which is one of the first in the nation committed to exclusively preventing, investigating, and prosecuting hate crimes. She also created the Conviction Integrity Unit to restore justice to the wrongfully convicted, which is also another Queens County first. And she also enhanced Community Partnership Division to strengthen ties to many communities that comprise the most diverse county in the United States. And as Queens DA, she brings a steady and community-centered approach to the office, while also helping to implement meaningful changes in the criminal justice system. Please join me in welcoming Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz.
Thank you, Mr. Yee. Thank you very much for the work that you do for the borough, for the office, and for helping us out and really leading the way in a lot of these events. I would like to note, I know you talked about the translation. Just so everybody knows, it's the little globe icon at the bottom of your screen, I guess it is, just to make sure that everyone can get the translation should they want to. I would like to thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Grace Meng, an unbelievable Congresswoman in Washington, brings home everything that the district needs and puts up a fight every single day for her community here in Queens County, but as important fights for our country. Senator John Liu, who I will introduce in a moment, is up in Albany, working hard every single day to bring money home for the district and to make sure that his community gets a say up in Albany, and not an easy place sometimes to serve. Councilman Peter Koo, who's really on the ground here in Queens County and in his community fighting every single day at the council. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors, Matt. You know, we have AAFE, CIIPA, CPC. We have a lot of acronyms here, apparently. You know, the FFA, Garden of Hope, KCS, CAGNY, Legal Good, NAPIPA, NFFAA, OCA, New York, you know, all these different organizations who care deeply about what is going on in the city and in the country today. And we are all aware and we're concerned about the increase of attacks against members of the Asian community. And we're all here because these incidents must stop. and because we want to change the climate of fear that has been created by these attacks. Even before COVID, crimes targeting the Asian American community were increasing. Across the city, the number of crimes targeting the community increased from 2019 to 2020. And across the country over the last 5 years, we've seen a trend upward against the Asian people of this country. COVID misinformation, existing prejudice, created a toxic mix that has fueled many of these incidents. And we can combat this trend. And we do this, and we have to work together. And I want to make it clear, we are all suffering when we think about these events happening in Queens, in the borough that we all share, in the 190 countries that we all share, 200 languages right here in the borough of Queens County. And that is not who we are, where we live. Our diversity is our strength. It is the gift that we give to the rest of the country. We must stand together, and we need the community's help. We need members of the community to report these crimes in real time as they're taking place or shortly after. And when you report a hate crime in progress, the chance of that perpetrator being caught is increased. The sooner the police can gather evidence, the stronger the case. So much evidence can be time sensitive, like surveillance video and cell phone records and witness accounts that are truly so important. And anyone can report a crime. The police will not ask about your immigration status. My office will not ask about your status, documented, undocumented. We are here to help you and protect you. We're here to protect you as a witness. We're here to protect you as a victim. So please utilize this office. During the first 100 days of my administration, I created the Hate Crimes Bureau, as Matthew said, one of the first in the country. It's focused exclusively on investigating allegations of hate-motivated crimes and prosecuting the perpetrators. My hate crime prosecutors work closely with the NYPD task force. Today you have Sergeant Lee. She is the sergeant in my DA squad, and she also works with the hate crimes task force. And we're also engaged in community outreach to keep those vital lines of communication open and to stamp out hate crimes from our community. When there's an incident against an Asian victim, even if it is not deemed a hate crime by definition of the law, meaning they're not singled out solely because of their background or their ethnicity, we still prosecute aggressively, even if we cannot legally establish the perpetrator act based on solely the bias. We still prosecute the underlying crime. And so there'll be consequences for the act. I would like to thank on this call the panelists, Safe Horizons, Iris Wong, who is Safe Horizons is an amazing partner to us in so many ways, and we thank them. I want to thank Deputy Inspector Jessica Corey in the NYPD Hate Crimes, who works with us tirelessly every day. Michael Brobner is the Chief of Hate Crimes. He is the one who prosecutes them. He's the one that goes out in the community and educates. Sergeant Lee is from my squad, but she's on the hate crimes. We have Jessica Santos, who is the head of our victims services. So if there is a victim who needs a service, she and her whole team, I know Luke's also on the call, help out. Elizabeth Bian is a full-time employee here at the office. She is an interpreter today, but she does many things. Rokeya Akhtar, proud to have her with us. David Chang has been leading the youth development here in the Queens District Attorney's Office. And last but certainly not least, our executive over all of this and our community engagement executive, Colleen Babb, also a daughter of Queens County. And so it's an exciting time here in this office. We are here for you. We want to make sure that you know what we do. Right now, I'd like to thank our partners, Congresswoman Meng, and Senator John Liu is here, and I'd love for him to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Madam District Attorney. I apologize that my camera is having issues, and so maybe I shouldn't apologize. Maybe I should say you are lucky today that you don't get to see my mug. But I'm very proud to be part of this very special event. I want to thank our DA, Melinda Katz, for doing this. As we all know, it's been a really horrendous year with COVID-19 afflicting so many of us in the community and all throughout the world. As an Asian American, though, it's been a doubly horrific year with you can't even call it a rise in hate crime and bias incidents against Asian Americans. It's been an utter onslaught. And we need multiple responses to help the community and to stamp out the inherent racism that, as DA Katz said, existed before the pandemic, but has only become more pronounced and exacerbated, especially when the then leader of this country spared no effort to try to scapegoat China and Chinese Americans, and by extension, Asian Americans, for the virus. We have seen so many vicious attacks, and we have seen so many not as violent incidents, but still rife with stupid gestures and comments. It reminds us that the racism and bigotry is not yet a thing of the past. I think the actions of DA Melinda Katz and her entire team, they go a long way towards sending a strong message that we're not going to tolerate this kind of hate and bigotry, and that Asian Americans are as much a part of the community as anybody else, and that Asian Americans are indeed Americans and even humans, because sometimes the viciousness with which some of these attacks have been carried out, it's almost as if Asian Americans are not actually humans. So we need to take these actions to stop the dehumanizing of Asian Americans and stop the preying on Asian Americans, particularly our older seniors, and really get to a point where we can all emerge from this COVID pandemic as best as possible. So thank you to the entire team. I certainly want to give a shout out to Liz Bien, who she represents you everywhere, Madam DA. There's you don't know this. I've known Liz for a long time. There's actually 3 of them. That's how she does it. And of course, Matthew, I call him Myung Yi, who really has worked so hard and risen through the ranks of the DA's office for many years now. And I'm very proud of him. And so with that, once again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to share my video, but you're probably all better off because I wasn't able to. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. As an Asian American, as a fellow Queensian and New Yorker, and as your constituent, DA Katz, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Councilman Peter Koo works tirelessly in the council. I'd love for him to greet everyone.
Thank you, Madam DA Katz. Hello, everyone. My name is Councilmember Peter Koo, and I represent Queens, Flushing, Queens. Thank you to our DA, Melinda Katz, my colleagues, Senator John Liu and Congresswoman Grace Mann, and all the nonprofits who join us today. We have all worked together for years to try to make life better for our community and our constituents. With this latest rise in hate crimes against Asians, we need to double our efforts to ensure the safety of our community. For too long, our community has led in poverty, unemployment, COVID-19 infection rates, and now hate crimes. And yet, the model minority continues to haunt us. As of March, there have been over 30 reported hate crimes in New York City with an Asian American victim. But we all know that the number is too low. Many of us have endured microaggressions, bias, and discriminations in some way. Now is the time to report it. I was even attacked last year. I fought back and reported it right away, and the perpetrator was caught. If there's one thing we can do together to try to stem this tide of hatred, is to get the message out that we must not be afraid to step forward. We should never consider discrimination or microaggression as just something we must endure as Asians. We have done that for far too long, and it has led us to our current state of affairs. We must also look to our leaders to support us. We cannot support the former president of the United States who demonized us by using the term China virus, or Kung Fu. We cannot allow candidates to get elected like Sarah King in Texas, who said, "I don't want Chinese to be here." And then she said, "I can say that because I'm Korean." No, she can't do that. We need to shut these sentiments down on every level, because every time a person in power demonizes Asian, they influence their followers to do the same. The good news is we have seen an outpouring of support from good people. Community safety patrols and escort services are popping up, and there's even a new cab service for the elderly. At the end of the day, we must also rely on resources from every level of government to fund our critical social service groups like those here today. They are the ones that are on the front lines, providing real support to our community. So thank you for all of you coming today. I know if we continue coming together to support each other, we will prevail. Thank you, DA Melinda Katz.
Thank you, Councilman Koo. We appreciate all of your support and work on behalf of the borough. Mr. Yee, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Before I do, I would like to just offer my deep, respect for everyone that is involved here today and for our participants who are listening and watching this webinar. It has been a difficult year. It has been rough on families. It has been rough on our kids. It's been rough on our parents and our grandparents. Everyone who is in a job is doing the job and making sure their families are safe and sound. I have two young kids, as many of you know, a 10 and a 12-year-old. They are doing blended learning, and I cannot imagine how I would be doing that were I to be in a different position than now. It is a difficult year for everyone. We want to make sure, though, that if you ever feel unsafe and if you ever feel like you need to reach out to for help, that you know exactly where to go, who to reach out to, and that we are available to you in whatever capacity you need. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, DA Katz. And before we move on to the panelist portion of the program, I want to acknowledge Mr. Christian Romero, who is here on behalf of Congresswoman Grace Meng, who had a last-minute emergency scheduling conflict. To move on with our program, I want to introduce everyone to the new commanding officer of the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force, and that is Deputy Inspector Jessica Corey. Deputy Inspector Corey, if you could give us your remarks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. These sessions, I've been doing them all over the city, both live and on Zoom and other platforms, and so appreciate DA Katz for allowing us to participate and get the information out that's being put out today. I've been doing this job for about, I think, 5 weeks now, and really the issue with anti-Asian hate crimes has just really been something that has been my full and complete focus. And we are going to do our best to not only increase apprehension efforts and make sure that we're bringing people to justice with our work with the DA's offices, but also we're doing a lot of prevention efforts as well. And again, thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you, Inspector Corey. So to give everyone a quick glimpse of our program, we're going to start off with the NYPD panelists, which is Inspector Corey and Sergeant Stacy Lee. And then we're going to move on to the Queens DA prosecution perspective with Chief of the Hate Crimes Bureau, Michael Browner, and myself. And then we're going to move on to the Crime Victims Advocate segment with Crime Victims Advocate Program Representative and Safe Horizon Representative to speak to you guys. Just to start, can everybody hear me? I think my screen is going on and off here. Okay. For both Inspector Corey and Sergeant Stacy Lee, can we start off by explaining to the public who may not be aware What exactly is the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force, and what does it offer to the public?
So I'll begin by saying the Hate Crime Task Force has the sole responsibility for investigating crimes that are hate crimes anywhere in New York City and conducting apprehensions of perpetrators wanted for hate crimes. We also keep all the statistics for hate crimes.
Jessica, I'm sorry, Jessica যেটা বলছেন সেটা তারা হচ্ছে সমস্ত ক্রাইম গুলোকে এক জায়গায় করেন এবং একটা স্ট্যাটিস্টিক্স তৈরি করেন এবং স্ট্যাটিস্টিক্স
We have a dedicated of right now we have 18 detectives.
目前呢，我们大概有18个这个警员。
우리 태스크포스는 지금 18명의 형사를 가지고 있습니다.
Zhang, both of them were born, Detective Zhang was born in mainland China. He came to this country when he was 11 years old. He speaks Mandarin fluently, Fukienese and Cantonese fluently. And Detective Kwok was born in Hong Kong, came here when he was 16. He joined the military. He was a Marine. He's was a translator for the Department of Defense. You know, and he also speaks Mandarin and Cantonese fluently. And they have jumped in and been giving cases immediately. And they are now working with any of our Asian victims that do not speak English, that speak Mandarin and Cantonese and Fukienese. So they're just a welcome addition. We're citywide, and right now we're talking about Queens, but we're citywide. We work in all 5 boroughs. We liaison with all the district attorney's offices. I can tell you that as Michael Brodner and I have just, you know, recently become acquainted, but we're on the phone day, night, weekends. You know, it's just been a great relationship and partnership with you know, not only the Queens DA's office, but with all the DA's offices. We also work with the FBI, with the Civil Rights Squad, the Department of Justice's Community Relations section. And then I will let the Sergeant speak about the Asian Hate Crime Task Force.
Thank you, Inspector. So the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force was created August of 2020 after there was an increase in racist attacks against Asian Americans. So as far as the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force, it's comprised of 32 officers with different ranks. There's amongst them 21 detective investigators that speaks multiple dialects. Some of them can read, most of them can speak, and actually write it as well. With that being said, the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force is there to basically bridge the gap between the victims and the police. So we assist when we're requested, we assist the precinct detective squads who initially goes out on the scene to investigate a case. Once it's determined that it's a hate crime, it goes to the NYPD's Hate Crimes Task Force. So we assist, we bridge both units in where their translations are required or actually some investigations that are required. All these members, the 21 investigators, they're assigned to an investigative unit in the Detective Bureau. So all of us have investigative background to assist.
Very well.
The NYPD actually has 93 certified languages amongst all members that are currently active if we ever need additional assistance. Most of us speaks multiple dialects in the Asian or Korean or Vietnamese language.
Sure. So for the general public who may not speak English or have cultural barriers that they've encountered before or felt like they've been brushed off when they try to report an incident to law enforcement, I think what I'm hearing is that this task force, not only citywide, but a specific branch for Asian hate crimes, is the remedy to that. That you have Chinese, Asian-speaking officers who will speak with you and bridge that gap in language and cultural barrier issues. Thank you very much. So this, again, question for both of you. They say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What are some of the, I guess, practical preventative measures that the public could take in this climate right now, fear and, you know, crazy assaults going on?
So I want to mention that the last time I was with Council Member Koo, he actually did a very good personal safety presentation on his own about crime prevention when we were at the Sheridan in the 109 precinct in Flushing. But so just, you know, we talk about hate crimes, reporting hate crimes. As the DA said, we want all crimes reported. So it's really not up to somebody to have to worry about whether or not it's a hate crime to actually report it. And something she said was so important as well about calling 911 immediately and not waiting to report the crime. And I can tell you that in so many instances, these cases have been closed by arrest because patrol made those arrests right away from the initial 911 call. Another thing that's happened, we just had a case in the 7th precinct. The individual, I'm not sure if I think he flagged down the police officers. He told them something that happened to him. There was a 5-minute foot pursuit and we watched it on body camera. They actually caught the perpetrator, but unfortunately we never had the victim again. The victim left the scene. So it's very important if somebody, you know, tells the police something, the police take off after an individual, to go to the precinct or to call 911 and to remain at the location so that we can actually have the victim in that case. General personal safety tips, you know, just for any type of crime, not going in dark alleys, not going on, walking in groups, trusting your instincts if you have an instinct about something, not getting on an elevator with someone who you think might be problematic. I've done so many personal safety lectures where we talk to people about getting on an elevator. Would you get on an elevator with somebody who you thought was suspicious or you thought might do you harm? And a lot of people will raise their hands and say, yes, I would, because I don't want to make the person feel bad. And so we'd say to somebody, well, then just say something like, oh, go ahead, I forgot my keys, or I have to get my mail, or I'm waiting for somebody, you know, something like that, so you don't get yourself into a situation that might be problematic. Having your keys ready before you get home, not having to dig through your bag in front of your apartment building. If somebody's following you, not taking them to where you live, going into an open store that's open 24 hours, knowing your neighborhood, where you can go to seek help beforehand, before you need that. Not being buried in your phone, texting, not with headphones on, walking, you know, just being aware of your surroundings. For the people that have businesses out there, just making sure that you have cameras, external cameras outside of your businesses, not just on registers and inside, so that you can help with public safety if there is an incident. Having good lighting on residential buildings, on commercial buildings, all of that assists us as well. Sarge?
And I want to add something as far as victims, when they, you know, all the preventive measures that are taken. I think it's also important, as you're being a victim on a scene, whether you're a witness or a victim or ear witness, that you should listen and pay attention as to what is said and what kind of gesture that was made during the attack. That would basically help assist the investigators to determine if it's bias motivated or something said as a racial slur would generate it to a hate crime during the attacks or during the crime.
Okay, I think this is a very important topic that Sergeant Lee just touched upon, the notion of ear witness. We've all heard of something called an eyewitness, but what's an ear witness, right? As a matter of fact, if you're a witness who just, I'm sorry, a person who just pedestrian just walked by and didn't see it, but actually heard the slurs or the derogatory comments, and you figure to yourself, you know what, I might have heard it, but I didn't see anything, so I'm not an eyewitness. Maybe I'm not going to be that helpful. That's not the case. Especially for hate crimes, we need you as an ear witness. Am I understanding that correctly, Sergeant?
Yes. So it's what is said. It's important to basically categorize the crime to be a hate crime versus just a regular crime.
Right. So Chief Brobner will be touching upon the New York State hate crime statute later on and explain fully why ear witnesses are so important for that important reason. Let me move on to the next topic. Deputy Inspector Corey mentioned something about 911 calls. And I want to talk about something called the Genovese bystander effect. That's something that I think law enforcement learns about. And this is a 1964 case where a young woman named Kitty Genovese was murdered brutally right outside her New York apartment. And the New York Times reported that 37 people saw this, but not one person called 911. all assuming that somebody else probably called or must have called because this is so obvious, but nobody called. 57 years later, in 2021, we're now seeing something perhaps even worse. We all see it on videos, social media, newspapers. Assaults going on broad daylight on the streets, in a packed subway. What everybody's doing is just recording on their cell phones and nobody calls 911. And perhaps it's because they figure if it's on recording, that's gotta be the best thing, and post it on social media later and let the cops figure it out from there. Sergeant and Inspector Court, is calling 911 is it even worthwhile anymore in the day of the smartphone and and video recordings?
Well, Matt, as far as calling 911, when you call 911, you're being recorded automatically. So if you're given a description of a perpetrator attacking a victim, it's already recorded. So as far as having that record, it's also good for prosecution purposes. And then if you get multiple 911 calls, the central dispatch would prioritize the job and would tell the sergeant who's actually working, they would tell them there's 10 calls rather than 1 call. And they would pretty much, get to the scene much quicker if the priority is changed.
Mm.
So also, we have a lot of people that say that they have family members that have had trouble. They call 911. They don't speak any English at all, and the 911 operator can't understand them. So the 911 can transfer anyone who calls to pretty much any language that they speak. What slows them down is the ability to understand what language the person is speaking, because they just start talking, and of course, it's a situation, there's an emergency, and maybe they're talking very fast, and the operator cannot figure out what language it is. So what we have asked is that if you have friends, family members that only speak another language and cannot speak English, that they know how to describe their language in one English word. So if they speak Cantonese, that they know to say Cantonese, or to say Mandarin, or say Korean, or say Fukienese, and also that they understand that there's going to be a little bit of a delay, and then they're going to be transferred to an interpreter. In addition, every one of our officers out there on patrol, they have an NYPD phone that has language line on it. They can do interpretations with language line. We can reach out to people from the Asian Hate Crime Task Force. There are members of the department. We're such a diverse department. There are people that speak so many different languages throughout the department. We can also get one of them through our operations division as well.
So in a nutshell, Sergeant, if I understand you correctly, more than one 911 call is actually beneficial. As a matter of fact, the more 911 calls for the same incident, I guess the more seriously it'll be taken by the dispatcher.
Yes, and also the 911 call, I should express that if it's a crime in progress, they should say so. That it's actually happening right now, rather than crime in the past. Crime in the past, we're not going to respond if the officer is already dealing with something right now with something else. So if they go on 911, they should say crime in progress, and basically if there's a weapon used, of course, state the weapon and then give the location. The location is very important. First thing that should come out of the 911 caller's mouth is the location where you're at.
And that's also so important if you're somebody working in a business. So if you're a business owner and you have employees, a lot of times they don't know what the actual street address is. So you can actually have something right there next to where they would call from with the street address, or make sure that they have that on their phone, that they know what street address that they're at that business, the name of the business and location.
Very well, thank you. So we now talked about possible ways of investigating what's important. We talked about eyewitness, ear witness. Can you give the general public additional tips on how a hate crime case, can be enhanced, meaning increasing the chances of arresting and eventual prosecution of that perpetrator?
Inspector, I'm going to jump on this. As far as enhancing any case for that matter. It's basically for victim witness or ear witnesses to remain on scene, for the officers to respond to the location so they could be interviewed. And the other thing is, know your surrounding, where you're at, and what is left by the perpetrator. It could be as simply as a saliva. If that perpetrator spit at you, that's DNA. Or there's a weapon used. Did the weapon, was it left on scene? Point it out to the responding officer. This is left by the perpetrator during the attack. Or anything that you grabbed off from the perpetrator, that's also good to have to maintain for the officer to retrieve it. I know that during COVID, everybody has their mask on. It's going to be really difficult to do an identification procedure for a witness victim to ID that person, because ultimately you're going to have to do a photo array or you're going to have to do a lineup. So if you're being attacked, if I was the victim, I'm going to try to take that mask off first. So at least maybe you didn't get a good look. Maybe a bystander, a witness could have gotten a look.
Okay. So this is a little unsanitary, but there have been instances where somebody was spat at.
Correct.
And essentially what you're saying is that saliva is DNA evidence. So unfortunately, you shouldn't try to wipe it away until the police arrive and collect that evidence.
Yes, that would have been evidence, yes.
Okay. The last point I want to go over with
Sorry, may I just add?
Of course.
We just also want to make sure that people are safe, so that nobody's doing something that's going to get them hurt. One of the things that the cell phone video is phenomenal. If we have cell phone video, if we have photographs, but we've seen some instances where people have tried to follow people and tried to film them or tried to take pictures of them, and they have been attacked while doing so. So again, if we can safely get video and photographs of people, that makes a case for us. But we don't want somebody putting themselves in harm's way to do that.
Sergeant Lee, you and I were discussing video evidence. And from my conversation with you, you brought up a very cool point. If the public is wondering, and they were able to actually get good video footage, is there a way to get that directly to you and the NYPD Hate Crime Task Force?
There is. We have a website that I provided to you. I know a lot of listeners, sometimes they post something on either Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Right now at the NYPD, as far as the Hate Crimes Task Force, we do have a Twitter account, and we also have an email that we could provide to your audience. And they could, when they tweet in, just have them tag it to us so we could, deal with it right now rather than days later. It's a quicker process to get the information funneled through the NYPD.
Great. The email address for the Hate Crime Task Force is Asian, ASIAN, HCTF @nypd.org. That will go, I believe, directly to Sergeant Lee. Is that right?
I monitored that email, so I would be reading all those emails that comes in. That is actually the main email for the Asian Crime Task Force, but I'm delegated to monitor that email address.
Okay. And we're going to post this up on the chat so that everybody could get, a good look at it. And also, those of you on Twitter, the Hate Crime Task Force is on Twitter at NYPD Asian HCTF. So please look for them on Twitter as well. And you could hashtag any video or whatever other photos or evidence that you want to bring to their attention.
Well, and if you can also, the NYPD Hate Crime Task Force, our Twitter is at NYPD Hate Crimes.
At NYPD Hate Crimes. Very good. Okay, thank you very much to Deputy Inspector Corey and Sergeant Lee. I want to now draw your attention to Michael Brovner, who is the Bureau Chief of the newly created Hate Crimes Bureau. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Matt. Thanks.
While we're on the topic of enhancing cases and what the general public could do as bystanders, upstanders, witnesses, do you have anything additional to add to that?
one thing that I would add to what Sergeant Lee was talking about is when you think about being aware, one of the things we need to do in order to prove that a case was a hate crime versus not a hate crime is know what was happening beforehand. Sometimes that can be valuable evidence.
Right.
So look to see what the victim was doing. Was the victim coming out of a particular church or temple?
Mhm.
Was the victim talking on a cell phone in a foreign language? Something that would have potentially drawn attention to this particular victim. Also, what was the defendant doing? Was the defendant or the perpetrator displaying actions that would make you think that he was crazy? Was the defendant going up to just one particular type of person, as opposed to someone who's black and then someone who's Asian and then someone who's white and then someone who's Hispanic and then someone who he ultimately attacks? Those are all things that can be really useful when we're trying to determine whether it's a hate crime or not.
Chief Brobner actually has some slideshows ready because you've been everywhere presenting on hate crimes from what I understand. So I would like to have you put that on the screen now and everybody could, for those of you joining us on Zoom, you should be seeing a PowerPoint slide right now.
Great. And I'm going to try to go through this slower than normal so that the interpreters can interpret, because there's a lot to kind of cover. So the first thing to realize is that unlike a regular crime, hate crimes are really impactful and hard on the victim. Because unlike a regular crime, the victim becomes a victim because of who the victim is, something that's they can't change, something that goes to their very essence. So unlike a regular victim of a crime, they can't just avoid a dark alley or never go to that bar again. They are always going to be whatever race they are, come from wherever they came from, their national origin. They're always going to be whatever gender they are, something that they cannot change. And because of that, it can be really psychologically hard on them, on top of the whatever physical pain or property was taken from them in the crime. There's also impact on so many people other than the actual victim. Everyone from the victim's community will also potentially suffer this same type of pain and psychological harm because they know that it could have been them. Additionally, there are other communities that are similarly situated. So if someone from one minority population gets targeted, other minority populations can also feel that same fear, knowing that it could have been them instead. And all of our society suffers because when these crimes take place, we don't want to live in a world where people are targeted or victimized because of who they are. And these crimes divide us. So you have one group being fearful of another group, being fearful of a third group. That's not how we operate. And that's weakens our strength because diversity is our strength. And because of the media attention that gets focused on these cases, because there's so many different victims, it can lead to more crimes. You can have copycat crimes where other people target the same victim or the same victim's group. Or you can have retaliatory crimes where the victim's group lashes out at other people to punish them for this crime. All of that makes it so important that we take these cases seriously and that we put the resources that we do into prosecuting these cases. What I want to do now is talk about the New York statute, because there's a lot of confusion about what counts as a hate crime and what doesn't count as a hate crime. So for someone to commit a hate crime, they have to either intentionally select the person or intentionally commit the act or acts. In whole or in substantial part because of a belief or perception. Regarding the race, the color, the national origin, ancestry, gender, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or orientation of their victim. And on top of all of that, they have to commit some existing specified crime. And that includes most violent or sexual or property crimes, but not all of them. And if we can prove this, what it does is it enhances the sentence. So it raises the sentencing range. So if someone was charged with an A misdemeanor, simple assault, assault in the third degree, that would be a maximum sentence of 1 year. But if they're charged as assault in the third degree as a hate crime, it pushes it up to an E felony. That means that they can be sentenced to more than a year. Same with all the other crimes. If you commit an D felony, you'll be sentenced as a C felony. A C felony as a B felony, and then for B and A, it raises the minimum. So a hate crime basically is a sentence enhancer. The statute also makes clear that simply because you can prove the victim or the defendant's identity, what their class is, that's not sufficient to prove a hate crime. So just because the victim is Asian and the defendant is not, that's not enough to prove a hate crime. There's one other charge I want to bring out, which is basically a hate crime, but it's not under the hate crime statute. And that's aggravated harassment in the second degree. For this crime, the defendant has to, with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm their victim because of a belief or perception with regarding to those same classes, gender, national origin, race, those classes. They have to attempt to, threaten to, or actually strike, shove, kick, or otherwise subject another person to physical contact. So basically there has to be some hate element plus contact or something very close to physical contact. And what's important about this case or this charge is that it raises something that would be not a crime, it would be a violation, to an A misdemeanor, so that we can go forward and prosecute these cases even if the police don't see it happening. So the challenge of these cases of proving a hate crime is that, unlike all the other crimes, we have to prove basically the motive. We have to prove that motive element. Normally, if we're trying to charge someone with a robbery, we just say, look, here's the evidence. The person, through use of physical force, stole property from the victim. When you're proving a robbery as a hate crime, you have to prove all of that, plus what the defendant was thinking. What caused the defendant to commit this crime, to select this particular victim, or to commit this particular act. And you have to show that it was motivated by one of these factors, by the person's class. So to do that, we basically have to rely on circumstantial evidence, and there's lots of different things we look at. So we look at what the defendant said during the crime. Did he use racial slurs? We look at what the defendant said after the fact, when he confesses. A lot of times these defendants will believe that what they did, they were justified in doing because of who their victim was. We also look at the crime's location. Was it outside of a church or in some location that indicates the victim's status or class? We look at the defendant's history. Does the defendant have a history, prior arrests, prior convictions for doing the same type of crime to a particular type of victim? We look at any tattoos they have, graffiti that would indicate bias, social media, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, any other writings that would show that they committed this particular act because of this bias, this motive. And we can also use experts to help explain either the bias or what the slang or the term or the epithet that was used meant. Sometimes, even with examining all this circumstantial evidence that may or may not exist, we cannot charge the crime under the law. In those cases, we don't just ignore the case, the crime. We still will prosecute the case, and we will still continue our investigation to see if anything comes up that would allow us to charge a hate crime. But we don't just willy-nilly, randomly charge hate crimes unless we have evidence to prove that it is a hate crime. Some of the biggest challenges in prosecuting hate crimes is reporting, because people don't tend to report these cases as often as we want them to. Part of that is because of the language barrier. But as we talked about, the NYPD's Asian Hate Crime Task Force speaks these languages and can resolve that problem. And also in our office, where Matt is basically in charge, we have the Office of Immigrant Affairs, which also helps with language issues as well as the language line. There can also be cultural distrust because of bad interactions individuals may have had with law enforcement back in their home country or with officers in New York City. But the New York City Police Department's Hate Crime Task Force, the one that Inspector Corey runs, they have excellent detectives who have the training and experience to let you know that that's not going to be a problem. They're culturally aware and they can help you. Sometimes there's this concern that if you report the crime, you could get deported. That is not the case. First of all, neither the NYPD nor our office will ask about your immigration status. It does not matter at all. And in certain cases, we might be able to help because we can get or apply for U visas to protect someone who's here, who's helping prosecute a crime. There's also the belief that reporting a crime doesn't get results, that no one's going to go to jail. That's not the case. Sometimes people get arrested, and because of the disposition, we can't tell you what the results are. Maybe the defendant was too young, so we're not allowed to report it. Maybe they got a sentence that involved mental health treatment, so we're prohibited from talking about that. There are lots of ways that cases still get prosecuted, but we can't necessarily tell everyone about how we successfully prosecute those cases. And unless the cases are reported, we can't prosecute these cases. Let me talk just briefly about my bureau. As you know, it was a new bureau that was created about a year ago, shortly after DA Katz came into office. And we focus exclusively on investigating and prosecuting hate crimes. We look at alternative sentencing, restorative justice options when they're appropriate. We do community outreach like this to let people know that we're here and that we do prosecute these cases and the options that are available for them and the services that are available for them. It's a 24-hour, 7 days a week operation with a hotline. And we have expertise in prosecuting these type of cases. And here's my number, which I think Matt is including in the chat. So this is the way that you can reach out to the Hate Crimes Bureau.
Great. Thank you for the PowerPoint presentation, Mike.
Sure.
I have now some follow-up questions based upon what you presented. And
Sure.
Let's start with the basics. There might be some audience members who do not know, I guess, the definition difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. What's the difference?
So, as I said, with a hate crime, there has to be some underlying crime, some underlying criminal offense. You could have a situation where someone's standing on the street shouting horrendous, disgusting, repulsive things, even at people, saying, go back to where you're come from. You brought COVID here, something like that. That's awful, but it's not a crime. If they do that and then they commit a criminal act like punching someone, then you have a hate crime because you have evidence that they're doing this because of the victim's class and they're committing a crime, an assault. So you have to have both the offense, the motive, and you have to have the crime. If it's just motive, something offensive, but no crime, it's just an incident, not a hate crime.
All right, so for hate crimes that somebody can be arrested for, that's easy. You could go to the police, call you directly at the hotline for investigation. What about hate incidents though? If it's just words that you cannot get arrested for, can a victim of that report that?
You should still report it because if someone's standing on a corner shouting that type of stuff, they're probably not that stable, not that sane, and they could easily go from that to doing something where they do commit a crime. So it's good for the police to know about that, even if they can't make an arrest. You can also report it to the New York City Office of Human Rights. They keep track of this, and there's also some nonprofits that are keeping track of these type of incidents.
Yes, I'm actually familiar with them. It's the New York City Commission on Human Rights,
Right.
and they also handle COVID-related not only incidents like that, but also perhaps employment and housing discrimination. Subtle things like that. That's not exactly a criminal offense, but it still counts as, I guess, a civil rights violation. They would handle those kinds of complaints. And also, I know of a California-based nonprofit organization who has done a tremendous job tracking these hate incident statistics, and that's called Asian Americans Advancing Justice. So it's AAAJ. You could check them out on Google. And there's also another organization called APCON, AP3, the number 3, PCON, APCON. Those two organizations have been doing a tremendous job. And Michael and I actually had an opportunity to participate in another webinar with these California organizations. We got to meet some of their leaders, and we strongly encourage everyone to report hate incidents to those organizations as well. I want to move on now. So we have a lot of motive, action, what constitutes a crime, what not. It might be a little confusing, especially among the lay folks who may not understand the statute correctly. So let's go over a couple of hypotheticals, Mike. Let's say a perpetrator comes up to an Asian person and says, hey, you, go back to China. You brought the virus here, and just walks away. What is that?
A hate incident, but it's not a crime.
Okay. The same hypothetical, after he spews those bad words, he proceeds to spit on this person. What is that now?
That would be aggravated harassment in the second degree, because with the intent to annoy or alarm or threaten someone, he then makes physical contact, in this case spitting, because of a belief or perception regarding that person's national origin or race.
Okay. So this is the element of unwanted physical contact that you were presenting on the slide. Is that right, about this aggravated harassment statute?
Exactly.
So now, going on that hypothetical, what about if he just came up to him, the person silently, just spit at the person, but no words?
That would be, since you couldn't establish why the person did it, you would have the violation of harassment in the second degree.
So it's still a chargeable criminal offense, except it's not the aggravated harassment as a misdemeanor.
If it's witnessed by an officer.
If it's witnessed by an officer.
Because it's only a violation.
Or anti-Asian hate crime webinar.
All right, so let's move on then to another hypothetical. Actually, before I move on, Sergeant Lee, if you're still there,
Yes.
because you touched upon the spitting hypothetical before as well. Let's, in that scenario, if a victim gets spat on, you said they should probably not wipe it off because that's technically DNA evidence. Can that DNA evidence, is the regular patrol officer that's going to respond to the scene, are they going to be trained to collect that saliva as DNA sample?
So the NYPD, if this is determined to be a hate crime, the NYPD has an evidence collection team that responds to the scene, and they will collect that evidence.
Okay. Very well. Thank you, Sergeant. Michael, then let's go to another topic. The same perpetrator who's spewing these nasty racist words now goes to an elderly Asian person and without any kind of notice, punches him or her in the face. What do we have?
I think you would have assault at least 3 as a hate crime because you can show the motive because he's spewing the offensive words and then commits a crime, an assault.
Right. So Michael, we just went over a few hypotheticals and you also stated that not every incident can be charged as a hate crime. What happens to those cases then? If it's not a hate crime or if it's not charged as a hate crime, is it just kind of disregarded or what happens to those cases?
Well, first, there's still the underlying crime. And given the context of how this happened, we're still going to prosecute that case. So if someone stabs someone, they're still going to be charged with that stabbing, whether we can prove it's a hate crime or not. Also, we're still going to investigate this case. And I told you about some of the factors we look at. After someone's arrested, we can then look at their past history. We can look at what they posted on social media. We can look at what else they've written. All these things may make it so even though someone was originally charged with just the generic assault, it might come out that we can, after investigation, charge them with a hate crime. And even if we can't, knowing what they did, we're still going to prosecute that case aggressively. If they're just punching an elderly woman for no reason, that's not something that we're like, doesn't matter because it's not a hate crime. We're still going to aggressively prosecute those cases.
So Michael, and I'm sure you're familiar with this issue as a hate crimes person, but look, the Asian community had to endure, I mean, in the 1980s, you know about the Vincent Chin case. That's something that still resonates, during this time, where somebody got murdered and the perpetrators got off with, I believe, probation and a fine or something like that.
Yep, that's the Vincent Chen case, right?
Yes. So this is a very sensitive, I guess, topic and issue where we see on social media videos of elderly folks getting assaulted, but no hate crime is charged. To those who may say, look, okay, maybe you can't make out the exact element of that motive, that they didn't say anything racially motivated. Well, can't you just charge it anyway? It's obvious. Come on, it's COVID time. There's an Asian elderly person. It's not an Asian person who attacked. Come on, can't you just charge a hate crime?
So
what do you have the answer to that?
The answer is no. The statute's clear that just because you can prove one person's race, gender, whatever class, and the victim's class or gender or race or national origin, that's not enough. And ethically, we're prohibited from charging cases and presenting cases that we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So as a baseline, we're not allowed to. More than that, you don't want to. You don't want to because we still want to be able to prosecute the person successfully for the crime they did commit. We don't want a situation where witnesses or victims are exaggerating or saying things that aren't true to make something into a hate crime when it's not a hate crime. We don't want a witness feeling like they have to lie and say, oh, he did say some sort of slur, or he did do X, Y, and Z in order to make it a hate crime, and then have the jury hear from other witnesses who said, I didn't hear that, and then suddenly the jury's like, I don't know if I can believe anything this witness said, the victim said, because I know that this part isn't true. So that's not good. Also, we don't want to charge hate crimes when it's not a hate crime, because then if the judge sees that we're charging hate crimes too freely without the evidence, when we have a real hate crime, that judge might say, I don't believe it's a hate crime, I'm not going to set bail. and then you get someone who's committing hate crimes back out on the street. So we have to be really conscious of what we're doing and make sure we're doing it properly.
Thank you, Mike. I have one last question for you before I move on to the victim services portion. Now, we've also seen many instances now where victims and eyewitnesses go straight to the media and get interviewed, right? Whether it's printed newspaper, social media, or even televised conventional news. When something like this happens in one of your hate crimes cases, are there any difficulties or challenges that it poses for you?
There's always an issue when a witness speaks to the media while there's a case pending or before a case starts. One of the problems is that if they speak to a newspaper reporter, that reporter might misunderstand what the victim's saying. And then we have to confront that at trial. Isn't it true you told the New York Times or the Daily News or the New York Post X, and now you're saying Y? So that's one issue. And the other issue is every time someone describes something, they're going to describe it differently, in part because of how much time they have to describe it, in part because of what they're focusing on at that moment. And then we have to confront that as well at trial. So it's not great for us when someone goes to the media.
Thank you for that. All right, we're actually at the 5:15 mark and we're running out of some time, so we want to move on to the next portion of panelists. We have a representative from Safe Horizon, Ms. Iris Wong. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Ms. Wong. For those who may not be familiar with your organization, can you give a quick brief description about what Safe Horizon is and what you could offer?
So, Safe Horizon is a nonprofit organization. We do offer different services to people who are victims of crime. That's including victims of hate crimes as well, domestic violence, and people who are victims of regular crime. I am a domestic violence advocate at the 109 precinct. So I work with a lot of domestic violence at the precinct, but I do work with victims of hate crime as well. We do work with ranges of different agencies and services. We work with, we help plan with safety planning, counseling, legal aid, court programs, community programs, the FJC, and reach out to other agencies. We do reach out, even though we are a nonprofit, we still have other agencies that we do work with, which is the Korean American Family Service Center and the Garden of Hope.
Okay.
Now, every services that we do provide is free of charge. We do not charge anything to these clients or victims. Even if we refer you out to other services, it is free.
Now, we've come across a lot of traumatized hate crime victims. Is there any kind of mental counseling or services or resources that you guys could refer them to or offer?
Yes, so many of our victims, they are traumatized through these crimes. So we do refer them to the Safe Horizon Community Program, which is free counseling programs. These are actually like licensed therapists that do listen. They do get up to 4 free sessions at the community program. And then thereafter, they refer you to a New York City funded agency that do long-term therapy sessions. We also have something that we refer our clients to, which is the mobile crisis team, which is funded within the New York City. They come to your home. It is a group of psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, social work that come to your home and they evaluate you. And then from there, they'll let you know if you need to go to the hospital or go to a counseling, specialist to seek treatment or just need someone to speak to. And it's all free of charge. That's one thing that we always let our clients know. We don't try to refer our clients or victims to agencies that do cost money, funds. We try to to refer to that won't hurt our clients' financial status.
Thank you. Folks, for Safe Horizon, you could always find them on Google. Their information will be posted on the chat portion, their phone number, email, and website. Please seek them out, especially for the mental health counseling. I believe it's such an important topic and something that's very underutilized, especially I believe in the Asian community. And Safe Horizon is such a great organization that the DA's office works with hand in hand all the time. And I want to next move on to Mr. Luke Bischow from the Crime Victims Advocate Program at the Queens DA's office. Hello, Mr. Bischow.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Yee. Thank you for having us.
Can you briefly describe what your organization does and what you could offer?
Sure. So once more, my name is Luke Bischow. I work at the Queens District Attorney Crime Victim Advocate Program. I'm a licensed master social worker. The mission of the Crime Victim Advocate Program is to help crime victims navigate through the criminal justice system. Its mission is to aid the victims of crimes within Queens County to provide concrete emotional as well as criminal justice support to all crime victims, as stated by our Queens District Attorney, Melinda Katz. We do provide both in-office services as well as outside office services. In office, we do provide short-term therapy when it's appropriate. We do provide court accompaniment, and we also assist with writing victim impact statements. Outside of the office, we work with community agencies to provide additional supports and resources to the individuals who have been victimized. This includes, but is not limited to, private therapists, therapy agencies within the community. We also work very closely with the Office of Victim Services and other agencies, even including Safe Horizon, who we have with us today, fortunately. And as it pertains to the Asian community, we do utilize a language line, if necessary, that allows us to communicate with all crime victims, indiscriminate of their primary language, so we can address their concerns and do our best to support them.
Great, thank you. So the Queens DA's Office Crime Victim Advocate Program, their information is also on the chat portion right now. If you guys could all take a look, please spread the word. Maybe perhaps none of our participants needs their services, but it's always good to know about these organizations in advance, rather than trying to find something for victims after the fact. I want to also use this time to address a couple of questions that we received from registrations, and it's going to be addressed to all our panelists. First is this. I came across a blood-chilling comment right under an online news platform called AMNY, and it read something like this: Asians deserve every punch, blow, and bash since they root for pig skin color people. And the registered concerned audience participants said, understand this is a public online forum where any reader can be victimized. Is there any way for authorities or AMNY to stop this person from making such horrible comments and influencing others? Or does this person sustain his right of freedom of speech? Okay. Panelists. Michael, do you want to start?
Sure. First, it's not a crime. It's disgusting, but not a crime. What the best course of action would be to do is flag it, see if who's ever running the site will remove this person or block this person or take down the comment. I know that Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they all have a reporting mechanism. And the more people that report it, just like with the 911 calls, the higher up it gets in the food chain or in the evaluation, and the more quickly it's likely to come down. So that's the best thing to do.
Sergeant Lee, do you agree with that statement from police perspective?
Yes, I agree with that statement. It's freedom of speech at that point.
Okay. So we understand there's a lot of public online forums that have very nasty comments or what have you. And probably the fastest way is to reach out to that online forum directly and bring it to their attention so that they can shut it down themselves. We also want to address another question. How can discrimination stop at the school level, meaning discrimination from teachers and also from children? Okay. Can the government provide education to our community with some educational tools to help with protection to our people in combating hate crimes? Now, this is a good one because I'm a parent myself to young children, as many of our viewers I'm sure are. So we've been talking so far about adults and even elderly victims. What about the young ones? Chief Robin, want to start off?
Yeah, there's a bunch of educational programs that are available. I know that the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crime is working on, I think they're almost completed, a really, what it looked to me, really great program for middle school students and possibly high school students. It's a block of training on hate crimes and the history of hate crimes. That's really good. There's also lots of different online services that are available. I know that the ADL has one, and Teaching Tolerance, which is the Southern Poverty Law Centers. They both have online sources. And then in New York City, in Queens, there's the Kuppenberg Center at Queens College. And then there's the Holocaust Center in New York City. And there's the Tannenbaum Center in New York City. So there's lots of different options for people who want to get educated in this. And there's also lots of different local groups. The Department of Education has a pamphlet, and I'll try to put that in the chat, that link.
Great. Sergeant Lee, I turn the attention to you. Do you have anything from the NYPD perspective that could offer something for our children here?
Well, the young children, I know that each precinct has a crime prevention officer and also a community affairs officer that works in their respective precincts. And they usually go into the public school system, sometimes as early as elementary school, to basically speak to them and then tell them about bullying at that point. At that age is usually sometimes bullying occurs. To basically have the student, tell somebody, report it to the teacher, tell your parents, and hopefully your parents, when they hear it, they will bring it up to the principal, and hopefully the principal would address that issue.
Great. So the DOE pamphlet right now has been posted on the chat section. Take a look. Yes. Okay. So we are now at the 5:26 point mark, and we're nearing the end of our webinar series. It's only been 1.5 hours. It went so quickly. And I see in the chat section in Q&A, we have over 50 something questions that have been presented. We're trying our best to answer each and every one of you while our panelists are not speaking, but it's almost impossible to catch up with everything on time. So I ask for your understanding on that. But it is our time limit, and we want to address that. This is not, I guess, the end. COVID is still around. This is a serious situation, just like everybody acknowledges. But it's also evident that, as DA Katz mentioned, we need to work together on this more than ever. And that's why everyone in our office has been going and trying to reach out to our partner nonprofit organizations, because we need your help as much as everybody else. The victims need your help. And if we all have the same goal, I think we can work with each other. Even if we can't agree on every single issue, let's work through it, because we have the greater goal in mind. And whenever I have the privilege of having a platform like this, I always remind everyone of a quote by Gandhi that says the true measure of a society is in how it treats its most vulnerable. Right now, we have come across, unfortunately, another vulnerable set of Asian American folks who are in this country, and we're suffering quite a bit. But we're all here, and we're in this together. As DA Katz always likes to say, we're in this together. So I thank you all panelists for all of you behind the scenes working to make this possible, to our translators, our elected officials, and to our community partnership division, who is always running around making these events possible, and to our leader, DA Katz, for making this possible as well. Thank you, and we look forward to working together all the time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.